life early on, yeah. So a lot of things is happening.
There is a stereotype that women are more empathetic, but even realistically, how true is that?
I think that but definitely because they're raised as we are, and then we're raised because the race is like that. Like, you know, when you're young, you're a girl, I'm like, boy, like, no. So for me, there's a difference. I don't think it's nothing. It's more our social setting and our stereotypical ideas of
It's just a gender construct. Would you agree with that?
I 100% agree. And again, as I said, the men in those themselves were broken. And so were all the women surrounding them. You see, because it's not just exclusive to men. Women are programmed too. But in our case, that is a great advantage. Why? Because 98% of teachers in the early years are women. And they are more empathetic because they've been programmed to be. And we need greater empathy in those classrooms. So it works in our favor.
What is stopping empathy being valued and taught on a global scale? What are the issues you're coming up against?
Well, first of all, I would say the education ministries, the education system is the most entrenched. It's the one that has its neck most firmly and deeply in the sand. I have never known a behemoth of such extraordinary proportions, a juggernaut, to turn around. And it's no coincidence that in North Macedonia, which is one of our three countries where the ministries have deemed it necessary now to mandate Think Equal alongside numeracy and literacy for 3 to 6 year olds, it's the Labour ministry in North Macedonia that decided to do that. In Greater Manchester, every single reception class of every 4-year-old in 1,250 reception classrooms have got Think Equal, and who's paying for it but the mental health teams of the National Health Service of the country. And who is paying for the 3-year-olds in the nurseries in Greater Manchester? The police. The police are paying for it because they understand, and this is what political leaders need to do now. The £121 billion we spent 2 years ago on mental health disorders, and it's on the rise. You can save a vast amount of that by prevention in the early years. You know that even as a psychotherapist, you know that.
I think that it scares people that there's so many people that are not feeling good, that are the mental health is so bad everywhere, and nobody really knows what to do. Children are lonely, and they are insecure. They are, just confused. There's also something about like we are stressed ourselves as parents and might not always be present ourselves and being empathic that way. And there are so many things that we can look into.
I agree with that even, but I think we better make some giant leaps now. We really have. There is a race between, education and catastrophe. And this is an education system you and I are advocating, are pleading for, that isn't even yet making sense. And if we don't get this to every child, in every classroom, in every country in the world, there are vast stretches of humanity that are going to disappear. We're already reading about the possibilities of human extinction. I haven't read that out now. I don't see, but in all my life, I've only just recently been reading about that possibility. We definitely know we're looking at the possibility of, not possibility, take care of our boys. You know that suicide is the #1 killer of our young boys. And it's no accident that the fact that boys are still consistently, putting Denmark aside perhaps, I don't know. I don't believe there is actually a place on earth where it is ideal. And I think it has to be consistently and comprehensively taught if we have any sense of taking seriously our duty of care to our youngest and most vulnerable citizens, our children. And if we don't do this consistently, we are irresponsible, neglectful, and failing them. And the bottom line is, we take care of our boys because they're still being told, man up, don't cry like a girl. They're still being taught that there is a weakness in expressing emotions, and of course there's nothing healthier. So we have book upon book. There's one magnificent book called Faisal is Not Himself. That is a book about a boy who's been, teased to the point of what we'd call bullying. We don't call it that with the kids, but he's being teased because he's drawing flowers, he loves to draw flowers. And a teacher in Greater Manchester told me that of all the books, that's her favourite. Why? Because she said, when I see our 4-year-old sitting, listening to that book, with tears falling down their cheeks, that is when I see, and these are her words, empathy in action.
This is so important, and we cannot give up hope and persistence in this. We know it works, and we know it's essential that we really create awareness of this, and not only awareness but change. So.
Isn't it beautiful? We started off a conversation, Tatiana, about empathy, and we've ended up a conversation about optimism.
Yes, yes, exactly. Thank you so much. It was very good to have you both on.
Thank you.
So much.
I was talking to Leslie Odwin and Evan Sandale about teaching empathy to children. I'm Dashiani Nabanagam, and you've been listening to The Conversation. We're back next week. Bye for now.
This is the BBC World Service, meeting the young girls wrestling for justice and Olympic glory.
Wrestling is more than a sport for girls. It can be the window to a better life. Respect within the family and community, guaranteed government jobs for sports champions, and an independent, exciting life. Go for it!
India's wrestling school for girls, Thursday at 8:30 and 19 GMT. At bbcworldservice.com, the documentary.
The genocide of Europe's Roma in the mid-20th century saw 500,000 Roma and Sinti murdered at the hands of the Nazi state and their collaborators. And yet the story of this persecution has deeper roots in European history. That's the Romani Holocaust, an unfinished history.
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
Hello and welcome to Newsday on the BBC World Service with Sana Safi and Rob Young.
US President Joe Biden has withdrawn from the US presidential race. Although Mr. Biden won't be in contention come November's election, he intends to stay in the White House until his full term in office ends. We will explain what his decision means.
Well, Joe Biden has backed his Vice President, Kamala Harris, to become the Democratic Party's presidential candidate. We'll hear from one Democratic congresswoman who tells us she's also backing Kamala Harris.
I endorsed her today. Colleagues of mine across the country have been endorsing her all afternoon. I'm confident that we're going to come together and this is going to be a unified vote for the Democratic Party.
The Republican candidate in November's election, former President Donald Trump, said Joe Biden had never been fit to serve as president and predicted that Kamala Harris would be easier for him to defeat. We will ask how Joe Biden's decision could affect the election outcome. But first, the news.
Hello, this is the BBC News with Fiona MacDonald. Joe Biden has announced that he will no longer face Donald Trump in the US presidential election in November. In a written statement issued while isolating with COVID, Mr. Biden endorsed his Vice President Kamala Harris to be the Democratic Party's nominee. Our correspondent Sarah Smith is in Washington.
After weeks of fevered speculation, it was still a surprise when Joe Biden suddenly posted a statement on social media saying he was stepping aside as the Democrats' presidential candidate. He'd come under increasing pressure from senior figures in his own party as more and more of them said publicly they feared he was on course to lose the election in November and they could drag down with him Democrat candidates for the Senate and the House of Representatives. It's just over 3 weeks since Joe Biden's disastrous performance in a televised debate with Mr. Trump sealed his fate. 50 million viewers saw him struggle to come up with cogent answers on live television.
Leading Democrats have been quick to praise Mr. Biden for his decision and his legacy. The party's leader in the US Senate, Chuck Schumer, said that he was a true patriot who had put America's future first. The former Speaker of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, who was reported to have expressed concerns about his candidacy in private, said Joe Biden had been one of the most consequential presidents in US history. Addressing reporters, the Democratic Senator for Connecticut, Richard Blumenthal, said he was moved by President Biden's decision.
President Biden has been one of the greatest, most courageous, and consequential presidents of American history. And he has helped to cement his legacy of leadership and vision with this decision. Let's be very clear, this decision was selfless and strong.
Following Joe Biden's endorsement of Kamala Harris, many leading Democrats also backed the Vice President to run as the party's presidential nominee. Writing on social media, California Governor Gavin Newsom called her tough, fearless and tenacious and suggested she would be the best candidate to defeat Donald Trump. Speaking to CBS News, the Democratic Senator from Minnesota, Amy Klobuchar, also rallied behind Ms. Harris.
Kamala Harris and I ran against each other for president, and what I learned from that experience was that, one, she's an incredibly strong leader who will bring to this office and to this campaign the receipts. She, along with President Biden, got our nation through this pandemic. We've seen record job increases.
The reaction from Republicans has been scathing. Speaking to the US network CNN, Donald Trump said he thought that Kamala Harris would be easier to defeat in November's election than Joe Biden. World News from BBC. The authorities in Tokyo have announced the death in jail of Tsutomi Shirosaki, a member of the Communist Japanese Red Army. He was serving 12 years for his part in a mortar attack on the Japanese embassy in Jakarta in 1986. They said he had choked while eating on Saturday. Shirosaki was released from prison on other terrorist charges in 1977 in exchange for hostages taken in an airline hijacking by the militant group. The Chinese embassy in the Philippines has called for the US to stop smearing other countries, as it put it, following recent allegations of a Pentagon disinformation campaign against Chinese vaccines. In July, an investigation by the Reuters news agency reported that during the coronavirus pandemic, the US military have run campaigns in the Philippines and the Middle East, which aim to sow doubt about the safety and effectiveness of vaccines and other aid provided by China. The US has not responded to the Reuters report. A football match in Norway's top league has been abandoned after fans threw flares, tennis balls and fish cakes onto the pitch in a protest against video assistant referees. Andrew Ochieng reports.
Many football fans across the world have often complained that the time referees spend consulting the video assistant referees ruins matches. The protests on Sunday in Trondheim in central Norway started straight from kickoff during the match between Rosenborg BK and Lillestrøm. By the 30th minute, and even after the players had been sent briefly to the dressing room, the tennis balls and fish cakes became too many, and the match had to be abandoned with both teams goalless.
At the Tour de France, the Eritrean cyclist Benyam Girmay has won the green jersey for the points competition, the first black rider ever to win a classification in the race. The sprinter won 3 stages of the Tour. BBC News.
Thank you for that bulletin of news. Hello, you're with Newsday from the BBC World Service with Sana Safi and Rob Young. Thanks very much for joining us today. Hope you're doing really well. We're going to spend much of the programme devoted to that historic decision by Joe Biden to abandon his attempt to win a second term in the White House. It is a decision that, although increasingly inevitable as last week drew on, it has nonetheless upended the presidential election campaign. We're going to look at Biden's legacy, ask whether his vice president is likely to take his place, and also look at how this decision could affect the election outcome this story. The number to send your text and WhatsApp messages to is +44 77 86 20 50 85. We're also going to hear from Spain as protests against tourists intensify, despite tourism being a vital industry for the country. And Isaac Fannin will be here with all your sports headlines too.
It's official. US President Joe Biden has ended his re-election campaign and endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris to succeed him as the Democratic presidential candidate in an extraordinary decision that upends an already dramatic race for the White House. Mr. Biden said on Sunday in a written statement that it was the greatest honor to serve as president, but he was withdrawing in the best interest of my party and the country. The 81-year-old had faced intense pressure to step down over concerns about his age and mental fitness and will remain as president until January. Former Democratic Congresswoman Jackie Spears spoke to me from Michigan about the way the Democratic Party changed presumptive nominees.
Over the course of the last 7 or 8 hours, it has been fairly remarkable. Not only has she received the endorsements of more than half to 3/4 of the members of the House and the members of the Senate, but it appears now that 5 to 7 of the state delegations who have delegates going to the convention have already polled their membership and have announced in favor of Kamala Harris. Not to mention the fact that in the last 5 to 7 hours, more than $50 million in low amounts have been generated in campaign contributions.
Without Joe Biden's endorsement, would Kamala Harris be getting so much support for her run for president?
Well, I think she would be getting a lot of support because she is indeed the vice president. And the biggest issue that was hurting President Biden was his age. And that issue evaporates. So the great success that President Biden has had in this country, bringing down inflation, generating more jobs than virtually any president in our history, with bipartisan support to both houses, were phenomenal achievements. And he took us from the depths of COVID into the sunshine, so to speak, and people had great confidence in him. Now, is this going to be an easy road for Vice President Harris? No, not at all. It is going to be a close election. Democrats are going to have to redouble their efforts, but there's renewed hope and optimism within the Democratic Party that we can move forward successfully.
No other candidates have thrown their hats in the ring so far. Some might be wondering whether this is just a coronation or simply following the process.
Well, I think it's really a great indication that you have these delegates who are typically grassroots workers who run locally to get elected as a delegate to a national convention, that they have undertaken this spontaneously on their own. So I think that dispels any concern about a coronation.
And how about the electorate at large? How popular is she?
I think there will be a bounce in her popularity, but she's going to have to introduce herself to many voters who probably don't have much of an opinion of her one way or the other. As a vice president, that your job is to check the newspaper every morning to make sure the president's still alive. So she's going to have to reintroduce herself to some and introduce herself for the first time to many others. And then she's got to make the case for why she should become the president. I think for women in this country right now who feel bludgeoned, the fact that abortion has been ripped out of many states as a right that women have is going to play a large role. Donald Trump is responsible for the reversal of Roe versus Wade. He's now trying to have it both ways and say, oh no, he's for letting the states decide. Well, letting the states decide basically means that millions of women in this country don't have the right to control their own bodies. So he will now be under the microscope the way President Biden was under the microscope as being too old to get elected to be the president. Now, having said all that, there's still racism in the United States. And the whisper campaigns that are going to go on are going to be ones that we're going to have to somehow overcome.
That was former Democratic Congresswoman Jackie Speer from Michigan speaking to us earlier.
Well, the Democrats, of course, are now trying to choose who their candidate will be for the elections in November. Well, it does seem overwhelmingly likely that Kamala Harris may well be that individual. Let's get a view from their opponents now, from the Republicans. We spoke to Barry DiNardo from the Republican Party convention in Milwaukee last week. I'm pleased to say he's back on the line now, joining us back at home in Maryland. Welcome back to Newsday. What do you make of the decision by Joe Biden to say that he won't run again?
Yeah, hey Rob, thanks for having me again. And we heard this rumor in the wind probably around the same day he announced that he had COVID, and now we're hearing about it today in an official capacity. This was expected. We saw this coming. And first of all, I want to wish President Biden a speedy recovery. Nobody wants this for the president. We don't want him hurt or sick or anything like that. I wish him a speedy recovery, and I pray for him and his family. But on the political side here, I think this is just going to make things harder for the Democrat Party. I don't think the vice president is going to be able to match President Trump in a debate. I think it's going to be, if I was Trump, I would demand to have a debate in about 3 days. I would do everything I could to get her up on a stage and challenge her and see where this goes. But he is going to dominate this campaign, in my opinion.
When there was the debate on the 27th of June, that has got an awful lot of concern, some of which have been in private among Democrats, burst out into the open when it was clear that Joe Biden was struggling in that debate.
Yeah.
But Donald Trump also does have moments when he's on the stage, when his advancing years are obvious, when he forgets names or loses his train of thought, for example. Do you really think he would dominate somebody much younger than him in a debate if it is indeed Kamala Harris who becomes the Democratic Party candidate?
I do. I just think he's got the experience of being president. He's, his character. He's got a past track record also. I mean, keeping the United States out of wars. I remember gasoline was much cheaper when he was in office. Food has skyrocketed about 40% under this current administration. So Trump's got a record that he can boast on, where I think that he would just bring up simple facts in a debate to the vice president, saying, well, you're under the administration where we're dealing with high prices and everything, and that affects everybody. That affects Democrats, Republicans, and independents. People pay attention to how much gas costs. People pay attention to, hey, my food is 40% higher across the board than almost everything I buy at the supermarket. So these things matter to American families, and I think it's going to be a major driving point to who votes for who. But no doubt about it, even with this recent attempt on Donald Trump's life, he has not lost one step. He is 100%. I was with him in Milwaukee. I saw him speak on a couple of occasions in person. He's just unstoppable, and that Republican Party now is completely united.
Thank you very much indeed. That's Barry DiNardo, who was one of those many Republican delegates at that Republican National Convention in Milwaukee last week. Of course, we don't know yet whether Kamala Harris will be the Democratic Party candidate replacing Joe Biden in the election in November. There's not much opinion polling on this at the moment, but the polling that does exist suggests that she does fare better against Donald Trump than Joe Biden did, but it is still an incredibly tight race according to those polls.
Now, Isaac Fenton is here to tell us about a very busy sporting Sunday.
Indeed, yeah, we had cycling's biggest race come to its end. Tadej Pogačar winning the Tour de France after winning the Stage 21 time trial into Nice. Following his win at the Giro d'Italia earlier in this year, the first man to win cycling's two biggest races in the same year since the Italian Marco Antini did it back in 1998, and there was more history for Eritrean sprinter Biniam Girmay. He became the first black African winner of the Tour de France's points classification. This is a secondary competition within the Tour, which is reserved for sprint cyclists like Girmay. In golf, Xander Schauffele held off the challenger Justin Rose to win the 152nd Open Championship and his second major title in 3 months. Last Saturday, I had the pleasure of going to the USA men's basketball team in South Sudan. The USA won by 1 point in the score there.
Let's get some business news now. We return to a top story, that announcement by Joe Biden that he won't seek a second term in the White House. Our business director Pierre when Denny joins us from the business desk in Singapore. As always, when there is a big political development in the United States, given it is the world's biggest economy, vital for financial markets and global trade, there is inevitably a market reaction. And how have markets reacted?
Well, they've shown a bit of red roll. Of course, it's very early to tell, especially that the US is still asleep. So we'll have to wait when the markets in the US open, as well as Europe a bit earlier. But of course, there's this old saying in financial markets: markets hate uncertainty, and that's ultimately what's just happened now with Joe Biden stepping aside, paving the way for Kamala Harris to run. This has, in a way, reshuffled the cards, because many investors were thinking, okay, Donald Trump has his way all the way to the White House for Trump 2.0, so let's try and put our money into what's going to be the new Trump policies, more trade barriers, higher inflation, lifting of corporate profits, for instance, the so-called Trump trail has started to be called. So now investors are thinking, okay, how do I hedge my bets? Where do I go? And that, of course, creates changes within the market. But as many investors told us, it's still very early on to tell right now. We still don't know if who will be, let's say, even Kamala Harris, will she actually be leading the ticket, who will be the vice president? There's so many more questions where this stands now to really understand the size of the impact of that decision.
And when concerns about Joe Biden's mental fitness were being discussed very publicly, we saw donations to his campaign dry up. Has that situation reversed in the hours since his announcement?
That is probably the biggest news out there since the announcement. $46 million of donations arriving into the Harris campaign. Robert, basically, as you said, these are funds that were just basically put on hold as a way to put pressure on Joe Biden and his campaign team to step aside by many influential business leaders within the Democratic Party. And so, yes, indeed, this is the biggest news in a way, as from what we're hearing, of giving Kamala Harris some momentum as she is going to try and lead the race against Donald Trump.
All right, thanks very much indeed. That's Pierre-Antoine Denis there, joining us from the business desk in Singapore. And he'll be back with us in an hour's time with another big business headline. You're listening to Newsday on the BBC World Service.
Good morning, this is where we part company with our World Service colleagues for another night and welcome you to BBC Radio 4 for the start of our day's broadcasting. It's Chris Aldridge here with my colleague Stephen Bailey in the controls. Later this hour, new figures out today will confirm that the most dangerous job in the UK is farming. First though, here's Peter White marking a milestone.
Over the past half century, the lives of blind and partially sighted people have changed a great deal. And as the presenter of In Touch since 1974, I've followed these changes closely. From social attitudes to technical advances and media representation, how have the lives of visually impaired people been altered over the past 50 years? And where might things go next? 50-50 Vision, the weekly tour, next Sunday evening at 7:50 on Radio 4 and BBC Sound.
Coast Guard Agency is 3585 July 2012.
That's a line you've got there, if you don't mind me saying. That you can save over 1,000 litres in tap water in the garden with collected rainwater. That water also saves It's the money off your next bill.
Ah, it's good, isn't it? Thank your foul-friendly, law-loving water butt. Join us at Affinity Water to save water, save money, and help save our streams.
Big Weekender, exclusively for adults. 3 nights, 3 main stages, epic headliners, and loads to do day and night. Whether you're getting your fancy dress on or having the time of your life at our pool party. Hey, cool. All this and more starting at £69 per person. So what are you waiting for? The fucking Big Weekender.
To win back swing voters will probably be to present an image of unity. I think the Democratic Convention needs to have a sense of unity, and I think Kamala Harris, she also needs to, for example, point out some of Joe Biden's achievements, whether it be on green energy or in supporting Ukraine.
Nice one, Harry. As always, nice Harry. In Plymouth. Kamala Harris, let's have a look here. You sent me a text here. Ian, this is from Judy, a Brit living in CT, Connecticut, in the United States. I know all the UK experts who keep mentioning Michelle Obama. Trump and Vance will be beaten. Kamala Harris is not a lightweight. That's what she's got to do. She's got to re-establish herself as the serious politician she was before she became Prime Vice President, where I have to say the overall impression is a cheerleader, nothing much more. Trump and Vance will be beaten. Kamala Harris is not a lightweight. She is more than capable and will soon be able to show her true skills. Do not underestimate her. She will galvanise the women's vote and beat the orange. Is it all? So she has put out on her Twitter feed. Oh, good old Ian, I managed to lose that. Well done, you brilliant technophone. Here we are, thank you. I prosecuted sex predators, she said. Trump is one. I shut down for-profit scam colleges. He ran one. I held big banks accountable. He's owned by them. I'm not just prepared to take on Trump, I'm prepared to beat him. So, we're talking about the overnight news, sensational news really, although a lot of people have suspected it. Did we think it would actually happen? Joe Biden has decided he will not run any longer in the presidential race. It's in the best interest of my party and the country, he said, that will stay on for the final 6 months of his term. He and many other senior Democrats have already endorsed his vice president, Kamala Harris, to be the new Democratic nominee. I'm asking you, it's a hell of a decision, but is it too late? 03456060 973 is the number to ring if you want to get in touch with us via WhatsApp and send an image. You can do so. It's the same number, 03456060 973. You can message us on X at LBC is our address, or ask your smart speaker Alexa send a message to LBC. Please include your name. Love to hear who you think that the Democrats should put forward as their head honcho. I mean, Kamala Harris is miles ahead. It would be lunacy if they went to that convention in Chicago in August of 19 without having unity over who their nominee was. The mayor hated it, but the strength of that Republican convention in Milwaukee last week was that there was only one show in town. And everybody was behind him, gushingly so. You know, literally every speaker would come on, be it Hulk Hogan, Kid Rock, whoever, J.D. Vance. They would literally say good evening and the place would erupt. Now, is there going to be the same unity behind Kamala Harris or not? Is she going to have to change the public's perception of her? 03